This is SRM Insider.
So welcome everyone to the SRM Insider podcast on our second installment of First Call. I'm Heyrick, the CEO of SRM, and I'm the host for this new podcast series where I'm discussing the big issues facing business leaders today. Without delay then, please let me say a warm welcome to Paul, who is SRM's head of cybersecurity for the Americas. He's kindly agreed to chat to me today about emerging cyber trends and observations for 2024. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Heyrick. Thank you so much for having me today. Great to be here.
So, cybersecurity risk has got to be at the forefront, I think, of every business leader's mind at the moment. What are some of the key trends that you're seeing, and are there any interesting themes or stories that you can share with us?
I think that's absolutely right, Heyrick. Ultimately what we're seeing is the fact that companies are still struggling to really understand how to best manage your cybersecurity risk footprint across their enterprise, and specifically across distributed environments whereby maybe they have a multinational or global footprint, or they're still, struggling with some of the post-COVID remote workforce challenges. And ultimately that adaptation hasn't really bared the level of maturity advancement that we would have expected in the last, call it 3 to 4 years. When we think about risk as a whole, that landscape is ever changing. We're seeing more and more threat actor groups popping up, more and more sophisticated, phishing and other credential harvesting tools and tactics and techniques being deployed. And ultimately, it's a big game of whack-a-mole. We're seeing a lot of CISOs and other senior executives in the security and IT landscape really struggle with where to quantify and make the right investments to best secure their companies. And it's been quite the challenge at the forefront.
And when you think about what the sort of key few things are that they're able to do to secure their companies, what would you recommend, or what do you see these companies doing?
So we're seeing some good investments continually in the identity and access management space, right? With the ever so clear buzzword of zero trust framework and what does that mean, and how to prevent unauthorized access from proliferating across the networks. We're still seeing a good trajectory in spend and desire to invest in those areas. But unfortunately, what we're still seeing is a lack of proper implementation and integration of these tools and technologies. So for example, it could be that you do have multi-factor authentication, but maybe not in a cross-border environment that leads to an attack. Or you might have SSO or single sign-on or other identity and access management tools, but weak, governance is being employed around them. And when we think about what's happening with AI right now, it gets pretty scary pretty quickly, because what you're seeing is a race to enable the business in a strategic, operationally, fiscally sound fashion, but the security controls going that way are still lagging. So it's just a compounding problem.
Okay, that's interesting. And so, one of the things that I think we've certainly heard from clients is it's not a matter of if, but when they're thinking about incident response. Are you seeing much being done around preparedness in terms of preparing the board and the business to respond to some form of cyber attack?
So we really are seeing an uptick in that space, Heyrick, and I'm glad you bring that up, because what we're seeing is a greater uptick in the amount of companies that want to support and embark on a tabletop exercise journey. And if you think about what that looked like in the last 18 to 24 months, it was very much of a paper drill. Let's just do a tabletop to exercise the incident response plan, but it would fall short because a key constituent or stakeholder might be on vacation. They kind of kick it to the right and say, well, on the next one, we'll try to weave that capability or part into the exercise. What we're seeing now, which has been a breath of fresh air really, is we're seeing a lot more executive level support and involvement into the planning and execution of these exercises, because ultimately, when these crises occur, it's not just contained within the IT or cybersecurity team. It really proliferates out to the executive sponsors and stakeholders and decision makers, right? So what we're seeing is a lot more involvement to understand the mechanics of pay, don't pay. What does data exfiltration really mean? How are they going to manage the communication both internally and externally? And how are they going to navigate, whether it be, regulators, shareholders, board members, or adjacent third parties that might have really strong and strict requirements and expectations of them as a supplier or vendor provider of services. So we're seeing that being taken a lot more seriously, which is a great sign. Now, the other side of that coin is, and I'd love to hear your take on this here in a second as well, is it still feels a little bit abstract, whereby they don't really know that it's not if, it's really when, as you mentioned. Curious to hear your thoughts on that too, since where you sit.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point around some of the drivers for this change in mindset, and it's there are some key regulatory drivers that we're seeing. I think there's the insurance market has a big part to play in terms of that lack of risk transfer straight into insurance that we've seen in previous years, and therefore there's a lot more risk that sits within a business that they then have understood that they're going to have to deal with before they can get support from their insurers. One of the things that I think has been interesting to see, and it'd be interesting in your thoughts on it, is that we've seen a reduction in the amount of clients that are paying ransoms, and that's come down significantly over the last 2 or 3 years. I'd be keen to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on the drivers for that.
So I think that's a very interesting point. 2 years ago, maybe even 3, I felt that there was a stronger angle to, even if backups were available, to really pay for that data suppression, right? Because there's a thought that paying your way out of it would really stave away that reputational risk. And what we've seen, especially with, the Lockbit takedown, was that data wasn't deleted. The risk was still there. Data was still being resold on secondary and tertiary markets. And I think that level of desensitization across the executive members in these organizations has also created a culture of, normalization of the fact that you aren't the only one that will be hit with ransomware in 2024, right? So it's about getting ahead of the messaging, properly defining what that risk is going to be, both operational, reputational, regulatory and legal and financial, and then managing it, right? Just really owning it and really driving through that corner. One of the CEOs that we've partnered with recently on an incident, I think that he did an amazing job on really being ahead of that communications and messaging front and really owning it, understanding that, look, this did happen to us. This is an unfortunate event. We're trying our best to make sure that all of our suppliers, vendors, and clients and consumers of our data understand what we're doing, and they were hyper transparent. I think that it really went a long way.
Yeah. And I think, from certainly the instance that we've responded to, we've seen it decrease from 70% of our clients paying probably 2 years ago to a little under 25% over the last 6 months. And a couple of the other drivers I'd suggest are, perhaps being a little cynical here, is one is the insurance coverage isn't there to pay the ransom, or it's limited, and therefore companies are keener to negotiate, but also their backups are a lot better. And so whilst there's the extortion threat from the hackers is we're gonna leak your data, it's not so much we've locked up your systems and you're never going to get your data back, because they've got the ability to back it up better. Does that sort of tally with what you're seeing as well, Paul?
It does. I think that there's been, luckily, there's been a stronger push to really understand that resiliency component of the response planning, not just purely the protect, identification, and the detection of threats, but ultimately, when it happens, how resilient are you from an operational impact to get back to, producing or manufacturing or whatever your core business functions are, to get through that crisis more effectively. Now, conversely, one thing that we're still coaching a lot of clients on is that backups are great, but disaster recovery architecture is even better, right? I think that there's still a little bit of more education that, we're helping our clients on to really understand the difference between backup solutions and true disaster recovery, which includes backups, but it's wider and more, it's larger than just a backup solution, right? And those clients that do get that are miles more resilient than others that don't.
Yeah, I think we've got some statistics around that demonstrates that clients that have got that in place, the cost of the ransomware attack is around 70% less to them in terms of getting themselves back up and running. So, which I think is probably a pretty good note to end on, Paul. So thank you very much for taking some time to give us some pearls of wisdom. It's been fantastic catching up with you. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to add?
No, I definitely appreciate your time today, Heyrick. Thank you so much for having me on. And, we're here to be everyone's first call across cybersecurity or corporate investigations. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for listening.
We are SRM. Search your first call to find out more.